So here's the setup that you want, how you want to lay out your supplies when you get ready to paint. You keep your painting area, your palette, your water, your towel up on the top, and then you have your paper that you're painting on or your canvas down below. Or if you're on an easel, you would have your easel with your canvas on it in front of you, and then all of this would be off to one side. But so that you can see what I'm doing, I'm keeping everything on a horizontal surface so that my camera can shoot down and see this. But you may want to put your paper up on your easel. In fact, I suggest putting it up on your easel against your board and put that in front of you so it would look, something like this. Or this could be, off to the side over here, with your paper on your easel in front of you like that. But for now, so that you can see what I'm doing, I have everything laying on a horizontal surface so you can see it. So to start with this color chart, we're just going to do two values of each of these colors here so you can see what they look like when they're spread thinner on paper and with a little bit of white added to them. And we're going to try to do our color mixing as much as possible using your palette knife. Okay, so what you do is you scoop. I'm just going to start with burnt sienna because it's here in the middle. I'm going to take my burnt sienna, I'm going to scoop some of that out, place it out here. I'm going to grab just a little bit of white off of that and then just start mixing it. Okay, and you can kind of push it down and you can kind of rotate it around as you're mixing. It all depends on how much you're mixing. And I'm just putting a little bit of white just to bring out the color a little bit. Okay, and then while I have my palette knife here, I'm just going to squeeze a little bit more off to the side there. Take some white. Okay, and I still had a little bit of burnt sienna on my knife, and I'm just going to mix a little bit of that in with the white because I want a real light value of the burnt sienna, so I get two different values. So the point of that is to show you how to work efficiently. I mean, I already have burnt sienna, I just want to make a lighter version. I want to get a couple of values ready to go. There's no sense in me, cleaning off my knife and so forth. Okay. So then have some paper towel handy too. You have your terry cloth towel, but it's also helpful to have some paper towel that you can just throw away, that you can quickly clean your knife off of if you need to dip it in your water to get some of the rest of that paint off of there. And then you can kind of fold it in on itself. Get a whole roll of paper towels, have it nearby you if you're at home. They're handy to have. Now you can do small amounts of mixing. Mixing like that small amount I could have done with my brush. Okay. You just don't want to do large amounts of mixing. So instead of using your palette, I just wanted to show you how to use the palette knife and what it's for. But you can do small amounts of mixing. You just want to be careful that you don't get paint all the way up your bristles into the metal part, into the ferrule. Because as I said in the slideshow, if you get it into there, it starts clogging up the bristles down in there, and then these don't flex, these bristles won't flex quite as far. So once that paint, it's hard, when you get it in there, it's hard to clean it out, and I'll show you how to clean it later. But if you don't get it all out and it hardens in there, you're done. Okay, it's like plastic, it's petrified once it's in there. Okay, so once you have those colors mixed, then you put your darker value up on top. Okay, my burnt sienna, I'm just gonna, and you don't have to completely fill that area there. Just paint like a little circle or a little square in there. Get rid of the excess paint. I like to dry off my brush. I like to have the terry cloth towel kind of folded up here so I can quickly just kind of dry off my brush because I don't want too much water in my brush. I don't want to come right out of the water and go into my paint because I'll end up diluting the paint, and it will be too thin and transparent. And I just take the lighter value and I paint that below it. Okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. We don't want to waste a lot of time on it. We just want to see what the color, we just want a quick swatch, make sure it's nice and solid, see what that looks like. And you keep doing the same thing for each color. You wash out your brush, go in with another color, and this time I'll do it with my brush because I'm just using a small amount. So if I'm just getting paint on the tip of my brush, you know, no big deal, as long as I'm not clogging my my bristles. And notice I have white on both sides. Okay, I used this side. I probably should have used that one, but you know, it gives you some more white. You're going to go through a lot of white more than anything. And I'll just grab. I know I'm contaminating my white with this. Every time I dip into it with a color. Whoa, this burnt umber looks a lot different. Whoa, there goes my head. Than what I'm used to seeing. I'm going to add a little more burnt umber into that. I don't want it quite that light. The burnt umber I usually use, this is a new paint this year, burnt umber I usually use is not quite that dull, not quite that grayish. That's really crazy. This is my first time using these paints. Okay, so I'm gonna take a little more white, pull it to the side over here, thin that out. Wow, that really looks like just a gray, like a warm gray. That's very odd. Sometime I'll show you what the other burnt umber is. The burnt umber I normally buy looks like. It doesn't look like that. But you'll just keep repeating that process. One a little bit darker value, just a little bit of white added to it, and then more white added to it. So you can see two different values, what each color looks like when it's lightened. The lighter colors, you don't really need to lighten up with any white. I would say maybe even the burnt sienna I didn't really need to add white to. But probably the darker colors, I would say add white to the burnt umber, the ultramarine, and the phthalo green. The other ones you don't really need to add white to as you paint them. You can just grab them, you know, throw them down on the paper. Grab a little white there. Okay, notice again what I did. This is very important to working efficiently and not wasting a lot of time. Okay, I wanted a super light. Whenever you want a super light version of a color, it's always best to start with the white and add color to it. Okay, I just had a little bit of yellow on my brush. I spread it pretty thin over here to the side, and I grabbed some white so I could get a real light version. But if I wanted an even lighter version of that, I may have started out with white first. Because if you start with the color first, especially the darker colors, and try to keep adding white to it, you're going to need a gallon of white before you get it as light as you need it to be. And as you're doing this, I suggest I started in the middle because I wanted to do something that was darker, that was going to kind of show up the difference a little bit more. But I suggest kind of going down the line. Do all your earth tone colors, okay, your yellows, oranges, and browns. Do all those first. In fact, you might even do yellow through burnt sienna, skip over, do cadmium red. Then colors, I would do your blue and your green last because those are going to muddy your water that way. Because if you did blue and green first and you cleaned your brush, your water's going to be all blue and green, and then if you go to pick up yellow, it's going to turn your it's going to muddy your yellow. You're not going to have a clean yellow. Okay, so I finished the top part of my color chart, so it should look something like this when you're done. Two values of everything. I added a little bit of white before I did the first swatch with the burnt umber, burnt umber, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, and phthalo green. So all the other ones just use straight up. You don't have to add any white until you do the bottom swatch. You can see how much space I used up. Not a lot on my palette. You don't have to use. You're just painting a little tiny swatch, so you don't have to mix up too much. You can see how little I mixed up for the orange right here. And even once you start to fill this up with color, once they dry, okay, see I can run my finger over that, those are all dry. I could mix more paint right on top of that, okay? That's the beauty of it. So don't feel like as soon as you run out of white space that you're done with your palette and you need a new palette. You can paint right over the top of paint that's already dried. The only time you really need to get rid of it is once everything really starts to get moldy or it starts to get too thick. Okay, and I'll get, for those of you coming into class, I'll give you new sheets of paper. For those at home, I'll have to, send some home when you need it. And I used up a good chunk of my white. You can see I got my greens and my blues and this white over here, all my yellows and reds and so forth, and this white over here. I might just scoop that off of there with my palette since there's not much left that I can, depending on what I want to do, I want to try to mix it up, and use it as much as I can. But as I used colors, I just kind of started scooping a little bit, kind of kept going around that white, scooping a little bit of white, not trying to get, into the blue or into another color that I already used. And if you look at my white over here, there's a little bit of orange in, a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow. But so sometimes you're going to get that cross-contamination. You just have to be careful because you don't want to have to wash in between every time, wash your brush out every time you go from one color to the next. So you pull a little off of it, here and there. You dip into your paint, you scoop a little bit of it off. And look at that, my burnt sienna is already starting to dry out. It's getting a little crust on it, like the top of pudding gets a little crust on it sometimes. But you just pull a little off there, pull it on your palette, scoop into your other colors sometimes. Like I might take, I've got burnt sienna on here, and I want to add some yellow to that. I'm not necessarily going to wash out my brush. I'm just going to grab some yellow, start mixing it into my other color, to get what I need. So you get a little contamination sometimes, but that's all right. Sometimes, it's fine to have those other little colors in there. They're not going to hurt it. Sometimes you get some surprising colors, or it's so little it really hardly impacts your overall color. So it's not a big deal. For those of you that are OCD, it could be a big deal.